because we go all the way to Atlanta, Georgia to meet a Barbadian who, as I said at the beginning of the show, went from mute to much. His name is Aubry Padmore, and he himself is an entrepreneur, a motivational speaker, and a whole lot more. Good morning to you, Aubry. Thank you for joining us on Morning Barbados.
Good morning, Pearson. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How do you do?
I'm doing very well. It's a pleasure to be here at home virtually hanging out with you folks this morning.
Appreciate that. And so I deliberately started that way from mute to much because there's a story to your beginning that I thought was so interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about the word mute in reference to you?
Well, it's a very interesting history in terms of what I was told. And part of what I remember when I was born, I came out as a child who couldn't speak. So my mom had a little problem. Back then, no one really knew what would happen. Would I speak or wouldn't I speak? But the doctors said that perhaps this child was in shock because of a trauma that happened previously before I was born. So when I was growing up, I started out without speaking. Then I began to stutter, and then I began to speak. So that's the brief history on that.
Were you able to determine what that trauma was?
It was a family issue which I don't want to get into at the
Okay.
moment.
So
But
yes, you were able to determine what it was. That's
yeah,
fine. I don't want to get
yeah,
into it either. So yes, you have been at,
right.
but did that help you to overcome a lot of what you struggled with in your formative years? Understanding what the struggle was.
Actually, actually, it proved to be a blessing in disguise because I, after that experience, my mother said she put me in the front window, and my first experience were people passing by, and someone mentioned to me that my name is, oh, how you doing, dummy? So that created an emotional impact on me. I had a very emotional moment as I grew up behind it. And as I reflect on what transpired, I started thinking, well, this is interesting. I can't speak, but my other senses clicked in and became more stronger and more prevalent in my life. Even now, as I reflect, many people remind me where I came from in terms of that experience. But it strengthened my tenacity over the years as I migrated from Barbados when I lived in Barbados. So it was homegrown and utilized when I got here even more fervently.
And so the first time you heard your own voice, do you recall at all what you sounded like in your ears? What that thunder must have meant to you?
Not particularly in the sense of what you would hear of your own voice, but I do remember the conversations that people would have with me, making what mock sport and so on.
Hmm.
And I actually appreciated where I come from in terms of that experience because as I grew up, I started seeing the world completely different in terms of the people around me. As a matter of fact, this is one of the reasons I ended up becoming a speaker because people amaze me in so many ways. And I think that having them around me give me the power and the understanding on what life is all about. So
So there came the time you
that
felt you had a lot to talk about, and now you have your voice, you're talking about it. What is it
yeah,
that you like to talk about?
I like to empower people. And what does that really mean? Living a life of purpose, establishing proper values, developing my skill set, and those types of things. When I came along, I was part of Boy Scouting in Barbados, and that set the stage for me to understand self-worth and value, and I carry those 10 principles with me throughout my whole life, even now as we speak. As a matter of fact, when I got here, I realized that being a member of the Boy Scouts in Barbados created the environment for me to be received here in America in a very powerful way because Boy Scouting here is a very powerful thing too, in terms of the systems and how they're set up.
Hmm.
And many of the people that I met here over the years turned out to be Eagle Scouts. And one day I was reading the New York Times and I read that 98% of the CEOs across America are Eagle Scouts. And I'm like, wow, brotherhood, you know? So those are the types of things that I look at when I look at life in terms of what does empowerment mean. Really, when someone comes into my space, I want to give them an experience that will be memorable.
Mm.
And I know that Barbados being a tourism nation, people would think, well, you're just doing that because you're from an island that breeds tourism. But I like to be very authentic with people. If I tell you I'm going to do something for you, I'm going to do it. If I can't do it, I'm going to explain why and move forward from those types of moments, you know? And I still do that today.
And so, what changes have you seen in yourself, not just from your beginning till now, but from your migration from Barbados to the United States? What have you seen about you that has confirmed for you who you are?
That's a very good question. I really like me. I do.
I like your answer.
Yeah, it started out with me remembering the history of where I come from. I love to read. I like to listen to people. One of the things that being a mute did for me is allowed me the opportunity to listen. And I realized that as an international speaker, author, coach, trainer, motivator, and mentor, a lot of people think that I like to speak, but that's not reality in terms of how I am as a person. I'm a very quiet person, and people find that very strange. Like, "Oh, what do you mean you're quiet? Well, you're a speaker." I said, yeah, but that's what I'm being paid, you know?
Hmm. Mm.
And also, the most important vitality element of that is that I enjoy it. You know, they say that if you find something in life that you do that you can walk with, talk with, think about, you will never work a day in your life.
That's right.
So, everything that I've ever done from the time I was in Barbados and left Barbados and even now, right? I get excited about in terms of the helping process. Going to school in Barbados, that was also part of my experience that allowed me to understand because back in the day, the school that I went to was considered a school for nobodies, right?
Mm.
Because I didn't pass the 11 plus exam. And I'm saying this today right now because I want the young people to listen very carefully. I went to St. George Secondary. And back then, people were like, oh, you went to St. George Secondary? You know, and today I'm looking up and I'm saying, wow, the lion in me never died.
Yes.
And it said, be constant, higher. And in those three words, I live my life from Barbados up until now, even as we speak. And when I get off of this, I will be doing those three things consistently and persistently.
You know, I'm so glad you mentioned where you went to school because St. George Secondary has been having a phenomenal year this year. They have truly catapulted themselves into the positive spaces in our news and into the minds of Barbadians. And to know that you are a product of that school as well, no doubt adds to that story. And so finding opportunities in the United States to be you, finding your space where you are you, the quiet, reserved man who still likes to talk a lot. How has that been so that you are sleeping well at night? How has that been?
I'll tell you something. I created my own space. You know, Michael Smith has a song, um, Looking for Your Place in This World.
Hmm.
As a part of the listening process, learning how to listen, I always thought, what is my role here in life? And I started out speaking in church. That was my first speaking engagement. And that continued to push me in understanding that when chaos shows up in my life, it's not a negative, it's something that you have to investigate and make a decision about how can you do something different to bring success into your space. What can you do to monetize yourself? And I reflect back and I said, well, when I was going to school, the first thing that they taught me to do in school was agricultural science.
Hmm.
And so, you know, I came back home one day and I said to my aunt, because I lived in Cleveland down the street, because she said, hey, why don't you come live with me? You're closer to school. I'm the secretary at the school. Her name was Esteline Silcox, for those who remember. And so I lived in Cleveland and I started planting lettuce, tomatoes, and cucumbers, and I grew them because that's what they taught me in school.
Hmm.
And the wider scope of lesson that I learned is that when you learn something in school, take ownership of it as a practitioner. Don't allow theory to manage your life.
Mm.
Take the theory and utilize it as a way of growing your destination. So these are all of the seeds that left Barbados with that I continued in terms of how do I find work. I created my own moment. I went to the library to learn how to put up sheetrock. I
Hmm.
clean houses. Nothing was a, I felt that everything meant something that you have to do.
Yeah.
So I don't care if I'm the cook, the bottle washer, the CEO. I'm still that guy that you can say, roll up your sleeve. I did it when I worked in the court system in New York City, and I spent about 15 years doing that. And that came as a result of me doing my entrepreneur push.
Right.
The guy that said to me, one of my customers said, "Well, you clean houses, you do such a wonderful job. What else do you do? And do you have life insurance? Do you have health insurance?" And I'm looking at him like, well, I don't know if that's your business, but I answered no. And
Yes.
he said, well, I'll help you get a job in the court system. And I said, well, if you help me to get an interview, I want to make sure that you know that I don't owe you anything for that. Just let's be clear that you're
Let's
just
be
doing me
clear.
a favor. And
You know,
let's
Aubrey,
be clear.
there's so much we can learn from you, and we will learn from you in another opportunity indeed. I have to leave the conversation with you right there, right now. But thank you for joining us, for raising your voice, for not losing your passion for speaking, your passion for telling, your passion for changing as well, and most of all, for being very proud of your school, St. George Secondary School indeed. Pleasure talking to you. Talk to you again soon.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning.